Big news in the morning is the Savile report, which was released as we speak at Scotland Yard.
Yeah, and with us now we are joined by Liz Duck. She's the lawyer who's representing 50 of the victims, and also LBC broadcaster Nick Ferrari. Morning to you both.
Well, the report says Savile was a prolific predatory sex offender who could have been prosecuted for his offences against at least 3 victims while he was alive. And this is 2 separate reports are saying this today. How did he get away with it?
Well, many people did report abuse at the time, and they simply weren't taken seriously. They reported it to the organisations, and they weren't listened to for one reason or another. And other people just simply didn't have the confidence to come forward. I've had clients saying to me, I was a poor girl in care, who was going to believe me? This was a rich and famous celebrity.
Who's going to believe them now, though, Liz? I know you represent so many people, but a lot of it was so long ago. How are they going to be believed? Where is the evidence?
Well, this report will hopefully help them be believed, because there is now so much corroboration. These people have lived in isolation for years. They haven't talked to each other. They don't know about each other's existence. Their evidence is strikingly similar. We have to believe them, and as a society we have to create a sea change now where people can feel free to give reports to the police and to think that they will be believed. Otherwise this will happen again.
Liz, some of the people who've come on to this programme talking about this very thing, let's have a look.
And he literally put his hand between my legs, and I couldn't do anything.
He came out and he just bent down and rammed his tongue down my throat.
You know, I felt something on top of me, and he was on top of me. I could violated my body in my sleep.
And the next thing I know, he'd sort of turned, was on top of me. His hand in my knickers and his tongue down my throat.
As I turned around, he just grabbed me, pulled me back on his lap, threw me to one side and put his face on mine and put his tongue into my mouth.
So many vulnerable victims we've talked about, Nick, we've met on this show, you've interviewed on your show. 214 criminal offences against him. 73% of those were children under 18 years old. I mean, this puts him right up there with some of the kind of
serial criminals. Absolutely. This is the stuff of a horror movie. But look, one thing I want to really get out there quite quickly is, I'm not necessarily a fan of all that the BBC does, but that organisation has been rent asunder by various investigations. People have lost their jobs, possibly quite rightly. Now that we know the hospitals involved, now that we know the hospital authorities, in some instances maybe some schools as well, it is absolutely imperative that inquiries and investigations go on there. In some instances, hospitals provided this monster with a room where he was able to conduct sexual attacks on vulnerable young people. Those hospitals must, as the broadcasting organisation has done, must get to the bottom of how that was allowed to happen.
And a hospice has been mentioned. I hadn't heard that
Which
before.
was a horrible rumour that was going around. It's now been confirmed in the report. You're absolutely right. It is beyond comprehension. And bear in mind, I mean, one other thing, he was at it from 1955, I think it was, to 2009. So if I've got it right, he started in his late teens and he was still active until about 2 years to his bride.
But Nick, can you imagine, I mean, you know, yes, enough said about him. I'm just,
sure.
Do you know the thing that disgusts me? I watched a programme a year ago at the BBC. I recorded it and I went, God, what a guy he was. What a brilliant guy he was. A documentary in praise of him. It disgusts me that I actually kept it. I recorded it and I thought he was such a good guy. But could you imagine working with him at the time and going along with this? What sort of person condoned this and sort of knew, well, you know what Jimmy's like? Can you understand that?
If you go back to when the story broke, there was a sort of culture of fear about him. And I remember one person who was like a woman who was like a junior producer or something, who he came on to in the BBC studios, and she made a report to her line manager or whatever, and they said, oh, that's just Jimmy being Jimmy. And I think it's a little bit what Liz was saying. There's this sort of cult of the celebrity. There's an expression they used in the report that's just been involved. He was able to hide in plain sight. And if you think what those words are saying, actually that is the best cover of all. So he was able to do that.
You now think, was that all just a cover? That he didn't really care about these charities?
So you definitely think that,
cover, wasn't it?
Ben, Liz?
Definitely. I mean, he targeted organisations where he knew the vulnerable would be, and his guise was under the auspices.
And yet we thought he was some sort of saint for doing this.
Well, that's right, and he even turned round to people and said, if you report me, I will stop my fundraising. So we knew...
But people were coming forward. Let's just remind everybody, the police, and I think they've got a lot to answer. Let's find out which the forces were, who had, I think, 7 separate people at some instances have reported. They never linked it together. I think 2 possibilities, 2 chances they had to charge Jimmy Savile with past. That's really important we find find out, because we must never, I know you'd agree, we must never allow anything within a tenth like this to ever happen again.
Let's go to Scotland Yard. Sue Hill, former detective, is there. She's been listening to what this report has had to say today. Sue, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I think it's a watershed moment, Eamon, quite frankly, that, you know, at last, you know, we're going to listen to child victims. I was a child protection team officer 30 years ago, and I can assure you there are many cases that I took to court. I hear what Nick's saying there about there are criticisms about a number of forces, but let me tell you also, juries are loath to convict cases when I've taken some horrific cases, sexual abuse cases, to court, and people can't believe, because fiends, he was an actual fiend, Jimmy Savile, no doubt about that, and there are many fiends still out there who are getting away with it, because unless there is corroboration, unless there's forensic evidence, juries are loath to convict. And I think there are a number of survivors that will be watching this, and they must be saying, thank goodness, we now have got a voice, and that's what this is about today, the report. It's giving them a voice. And I always think we need to remember this, you know, that old saying is, bad things happen when good people do nothing. So he had access and opportunity, Jimmy Savile. He's lower than a snake's belly. I know he's dead, and those victims, though, will be sitting there today saying, thank goodness, we've now got a voice and we've been heard. But they'll never get over it. You just come to terms and be grateful that actually there is some kind of justice that they've been listened to now.
So good people did come forward and say something, and that was Nick's point, wasn't it, Nick? Anything you'd like to say to Sue?
Sue, look, I appreciate what you're saying, but if people come forward, was there, do you think, a real sense that the police wanted to do anything? We've got possibly 7 people reporting on separate occasions, 2 possibilities to charge Sue. The police did nothing. I'm not blaming you personally, but I sense there was no will to go after Savile.
Well, also, I'm going to say to you, Nick, let's make sure we lay the blame firmly at the hands of those people. There are also people in your organisation, in the media world, that should have done more as well, Nick. You know, I'm not defending the police forces. There are now going to be, as I said, a watershed moment. There is a wake-up call. There are going to be changes. But I think we need to firmly remember there are a lot of people that wrap round Jimmy Savile, that he was protected. And let's use this as an opportunity to protect other people in the future, victims, who are, you know, subject to abuse by powerful people, teachers, priests, those people of influence, and they don't have a voice, victims, against those powerful individuals.
Sue, thanks very much.
The police, but actually, let's lay the blame.
Okay,
Sue. Remains.
Thanks very much, Sue. Liz, now that we do know, what does happen next?
Well, the next stage, as Nick pointed out, is very important, which is the inquiries that are taking place, because, of course, the police report just focuses on the criminal aspects, but the inquiries will focus on what was known about Savile and, most importantly, what ought to have been known. The BBC have already started theirs. The concern is to make sure that the NHS organisations, which are reported for the first time today in the police report, also hold their own internal inquiries. Every organisation which is named must hold an inquiry.
And what are your victims looking for? What is it? Is it a monetary compensation they want? Is it recognition? Is it both?
It's everything, really. I mean, the first part...
Who do you sue?
Well, you bring claims against Savile's estate and the various organisations. But the first part is obviously today. We call that Chapter 1, getting the recognition that they have been telling the truth. The next part is the inquiries, and then it's the civil claims. But getting the recognition from society that actually they haven't made it up and that they have been telling the truth is very important.
And of course, under Operation Yewtree, Nick, this isn't the end, because there's the Jimmy Savile, there's Jimmy Savile and others, those investigations are still ongoing.
And Eamon made that point. There are people who would have all this going on. There were people who have been involved. We can't say any names that we know. There have been some very nervous people, and the Operation Yewtree office has been very busy. I sense they're probably going to get busy again, perhaps over the next few days.
And you've heard the criticisms that these investigations are taking the attention away from the young people who have been abused throughout all this. Do you think a difference should be made, or should these things be treated equally as importantly?
I think this has been... I absolutely underscore what Liz just said. I think this has got something out in the open that unfortunately in our business we all knew went on. It was under-reported, it was certainly under-prosecuted. Now it's hopefully much easier if a young girl, or indeed a young boy, feels in some way he's been molested by a teacher, a scout leader, a soccer coach, a ballet coach. They can have a conversation around the dinner table that possibly was not possible, I don't know, a couple of years ago.
That's hugely important. You know, a lot of these people have said to me, I couldn't even tell my parents, I couldn't tell my partner, I felt ashamed. And if some good comes out of this, it's that youngsters today feel able to speak out and say, actually, this happened to me and it isn't right.
Well, society is different over 20, 30 years, isn't it?
We listen now. We listen.
And it still goes on, sadly, despite all that. I mean, you mentioned there that, you know, there's more help for young people. You are able to do that. We've got details of a lot of those helplines on our website. If you are concerned about someone, you're being affected yourself, you need someone to talk to, have a look at our website. That's itv.com/this morning. Lots more advice for you there.
So there we go. Thank you very much indeed. This report today saying Jimmy Savile used his celebrity status to hide in plain sight, with 214 criminal offences now recorded against him. So give us your view on Jimmy Savile, what you think should happen next. Get in touch with us. You can tweet us, you can email us, and we'll be back after the break. Guys, thank you very much indeed. We go to central London, New Scotland Yard. Mark Williams-Thomas is there as Operation Yewtree reports today. And what sort of satisfaction does this give you, Mark, having been the man that instigated a lot of this?
Yeah, I mean, the reporters talked in detail about numbers, about locations where it's taken place, and has given a real timeline of offending behaviour. And the police officers themselves, the investigating officers, have been very clear to say that Savile created opportunities in order to abuse children and was a master at it.
And were you shocked at the numbers, Mark? Because obviously these have just been going up and up since we first spoke to you and you broke this news, this story. Those numbers just increasing, it seems, all the time.
Yeah, interestingly enough, right from the very beginning, I believe that there were about 500 victims, and that's about the level. The one thing that has surprised me is the sheer volume in terms of male and female of his offending behaviour. I thought that he particularly targeted women, and particularly those of a teenage age. We know that his youngest victim is 8, and we know that his last offending behaviour was when he was 79 years old at the last showing of Top of the Pops. That's a huge span of offending behaviour.
When people hear that, Mark, they're still saying, how on earth did he get away with this for so long? There's been some criticism aimed at the police, there's criticism aimed at the BBC. I mean, it is an extraordinary amount of time for somebody to be getting away with that.
I think what it has done is it's reiterated just how capable individuals are when they want to abuse children. He was particularly capable in terms of his targeting. He went to locations where he had access to children, hospitals, schools, and even a hospice where he abused a young child. And of course, Top of the Pops, his celebrity status, gave him the access in order to offend. The schools that he offended against were as a direct result of Jim will fix it and him being invited in. He had almost the run of wherever he wanted to go because of his celebrity status.
Is this the end, Mark, or is this the beginning of the end?
Well, I think it's made a number of significant movements, certainly as far as a watershed moment. I certainly believe that is. And in fact, if you look at the report has not only enabled victims of Jimmy Savile to come forward, but it's also enabled victims of those people who are now currently being offended against, as well as those who've been offended against by other people. So what we've now got to keep doing is keep the momentum going. Never ever must we be in a position again where we allow an individual to become so powerful, like Jimmy Savile was, that he got away with it for so long.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Live from New Scotland Yard, Mark Williams-Thomas.